This is BJ Sasha. We're here today with Brian Keavey, LDA board member, and we're discussing being on boards and committees. Welcome today, Brian. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks. I'm glad to be here.
Hope you're ready to answer some informative questions.
Yep. That's what I came here for.
The first question I have for you today is what is a board of directors and what do they do?
Well, basically, a board of directors is the group that runs ultimately any corporation, and in the case we're talking about, they run agencies, which are non-profit corporations. So they're basically ultimately in charge of the whole agency. They hire and fire the executive director. They have senior staff report to them about how things are going. They make various policy decisions regarding the agency, and they basically ultimately run things at an agency.
What boards are you on for LDA?
I'm on the board for the Western New York region, and I'm also on the state board.
Oh, a lot of responsibility for you.
Yeah.
Do you have to travel to Albany a lot?
Well, the state board meets 4 times a year, so I go to Albany, actually Latham, for those meetings. That's just outside Albany. And so far I haven't had to travel other than that. I suppose it could happen, though.
Oh, that's why I've seen you on the train.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Huh?
What are some of the responsibilities you have as a board member?
Well, the obvious is you have to attend board meetings, and you have to be informed enough on what they're discussing to make decisions about it, because the things you vote on do influence what the agency does. And you need to be informed in general about what the agency is doing, be informed of issues. There are committees on the board that are sort of sub-units of the board that you serve on as well. So basically you end up going to a lot of meetings, going through a lot of paperwork, reading up on various issues between meetings. That's mostly it. And of course present a good image of the agency to the rest of the community.
Now just to give a little background for the folks, we were involved in a training in like 97, 98, wasn't it?
Something like that, yeah. It was the Consumers on Boards training.
And how did you basically get on the board you were on? Did you get on from that training?
Not directly. I mean, I got on it because one of the senior staff from LDA came to me and asked me if I wanted to be on the board. And so it wasn't directly from that training. The training does help, but I got on the board a few years after that.
Oh, so a few years after that. And in the first year, was it tough for you to speak up? Did you just kind of sit there and soak everything in? Because I know for me, I did.
Yeah, it takes a couple meetings to get used to it. It's a new experience.
Yeah.
You're there in a room talking about all this serious stuff, and it takes getting used to, but you can get used to it. It's like anything else.
What are some of the reasons you decided to be on a board?
Well, it's a good way to have influence in how an agency is run and what direction it takes, and it's definitely nice to have that kind of say in an agency that you get services from. It's like I'm not just speaking up at the agency, I'm directly involved in governing it.
Well, why do you think it's important for a self-advocate to be on a board?
Well, because a self-advocate can provide the perspective that no number of professionals are going to have, no matter how well-intentioned they are. And it's important for agencies to hear directly from self-advocates what they want, which obviously happens through self-advocacy groups and other methods. but the board is one of the most direct methods. Like I said, it governs the agency, so that's actually where a lot of the decisions are made about things that self-advocates are always talking about wanting to change. A lot of those decisions are made at the agency board level, and so that's where you want to be if you want to have direct input in those decisions.
What was the toughest part of being on the board for you at first?
The toughest part at first was, I would say learning just how complicated the process was, how complicated it was to get new grants going. Reading the financial statements was something. It's a useful skill to have, but when you first look at that, it's like somebody threw a bunch of numbers in a blender and you're just trying to look at them and, okay, what is this? And but you just get used to it, get used to how they're laid out, and that's one of the things that you have to know to be a board member or be able to get help with to be a board member, because the board is dealing with large amounts of money, and they're dealing with having to get new sources of money and having to figure out how to use it most effectively. So that's tough, but it's part of the process.
And what are some of the advantages for you being on the board?
Well, I have a say in how the agency does things, even more than just being a self-advocate outside the board. I get a lot of experience just in dealing with this kind of stuff, which I wouldn't get elsewhere. And I get to hear about and influence things at an early stage. I mean, I can provide an input on new stuff as it's going along. Just one example, LDA started an art gallery, Starlight Studios, downtown.
Wonderful art gallery.
Yeah, it is. It's a great place. And I was on the board while that was being developed. So I was actually on the board while that was being shepherded through the grant writing process. And so I found out about it and had some input into it while it was in the developmental process, which is a good thing to have.
And you take back input from other advocates in the agency and give it to the board. Do they listen to what you guys say now? Oh, because you've been on the board so long, right?
Yeah, they listen, and I should say LDA is pretty good about that now, generally anyway. But yeah, if I bring back input from other consumers, they'll listen to it. I mean, it doesn't always guarantee that people will get what they want, because there are complications that aren't obvious to someone not on the board. You know, people want such and such a program or such and such a change, and sometimes it's easily feasible to do that. Sometimes you run into things where you've got to get a new source of money or change some regulation or get the people in Albany to sign off on this or that or the other thing. It's more complicated than just saying, okay, the self-advocates want that, so we all snap our fingers in unison and here we go. But yeah, they do listen to input.
Well, what do you think are some of the advantages for the agency for having you on the board?
Well, they get input from a self-advocate. They get direct input from a consumer on what we think of what's going on with services and with what the agency is doing. They get a view that's not of the people receiving services, not just outside people, because a lot of the other people on the board, they're parents, they're professionals, whoever, but they're not actual people with actual disabilities receiving actual services. So that's definitely a benefit to the agency in terms of meeting its mission to provide services to us.
What are some recommendations you would give to someone who wanted to be on a board, and the process you would go through to try and convince an agency to help them get on a board?
Well, the process For one thing, obviously a lot depends on the specific agency. Some are more receptive to the idea than others. For the person trying to get on the board, I would say be open to learning new things, because believe me, you'll have to. No matter how much you know about this stuff beforehand, you don't know enough. Even when I got on the state board from just being on the local board, there are new aspects to that that I'm having to learn. And don't expect it to be quick. It's not going to be you asked to be on the board today and you're going to your first meeting next week. It typically will take months, and that's with a supportive agency. So, and for an agency, I mean, I would say a lot of them just have to learn to have confidence in their consumers and not assume the worst right from the get-go. Obviously, it helps for the consumers in question to have a basic idea of how boards operate and what's expected of them. But agencies shouldn't go into this assuming that consumers can't do it. And it also helps if you're going to be on the board to find either a board member or a senior staff person who attends board meetings regularly to sort of support and advise you along the way, especially early on. And, you know, basically, if you apply to be on the board, you'll get an application, which you fill out. It'll go through the board's review committee. They have a specific committee that handles finding new people for the board. And like I said, it can take a while. It can take it'll take several months, even in the best circumstances.
Now, what are some of the things you do at the state level?
Well, at the state level, I mean, we go, you know, the state meetings are most of a day, about 4 or 5 hours. And we go there, basically the state board, instead of providing services, the state LDA doesn't provide services. It oversees the local, regional subdivisions that do provide the services. So at the state level, it's more focused on overall lobbying in Albany, overall agency policy, and things like that. And so we brainstorm different ways of meeting the agency's mission better, and then what's decided there sort of filters down to the regions where the stuff is actually done.
So it probably took you longer to understand the red tape from the state level rather than the local.
Well, you don't understand the red tape at the state level. You never fully understand the red tape at the state level. You kind of tell it well enough not to trip over it and get it stuck on your feet.
Yeah.
I mean, that's about the best you can hope for. But, you know, you just go through it as it goes. New stuff always comes up. And so the state level is more of an overall coordinating board than a direct hands-on board like the local board.
So you like doing the state stuff better because it's more hands-on, or the local?
Well, I like them both. They're completely different things. It's somewhat of an apples and oranges comparison. The state stuff is more, or the local stuff is more hands-on, because that's where the programs are done. That's where we develop things like Starlight, or where we decide, okay, we need this many more supportives, or this much more allocated to rec, or whatever. The state board is more or less doing the big picture stuff that the regions don't really have time to do. So that's less direct, but it's important, because what the state does ultimately ends up determining what the locals are doing, or what they have to work with in doing what they're doing. So, two different things, but are both very important.
Now, this last question is a good one for both of us, since we were both on that training many years ago there's going to be a new training developed soon, so we're going to kind of give some input. If you could develop a new training for people out there who want to be on boards, what would you like to see in it as a self-advocate?
Well, obviously, it has to cover the basics of explaining about board responsibilities, board confidentiality, and all that kind of stuff. That's basic to anything like that. Also, I know the last training did a simulated board meeting, which is a good thing, but I would say if there's time, they should do a simulated board meeting and a simulated committee meeting, because the two types of meetings do have a different focus. And basically, if you're a board member, at some point you almost certainly will be on a committee as well. That's usually expected once you've been on the board for a while.
In other words, like they did, instead of spending a lot of time going over the roles, like they did, go over both of the different committees you could be on.
Well, go over the committees and go over, I would say, simulate a board meeting one day, but if you're doing a multi-day thing, simulate a committee meeting one of the times too. And you do have to go over the roles, but that's fairly straightforward. Just explaining that, you can't go talking about confidential stuff. You can't, you've got to meet certain responsibilities. It is a serious thing. It's not all fun and games being on a board, but I think people generally know that more than agencies give them credit for. So just go over it, make sure it's understood, and then, help do the simulated meetings and help people understand that. And also, I would say having people, get people who have been on boards to do at least part of it, simply because they know what is involved, and they'll have a better idea of what kinds of challenges someone with a disability is likely to encounter.
And would you make the training a little longer? Because I know for us, I think it was kind of short.
Yeah, I would say it should probably be at least a few days, even if they're not all together. Like if it's 3 successive Saturdays or alternating Saturdays or something like that. It should be I would say 3 or 4 days would be a good length for things you want to cover.
And I really think like you said, we should have speakers who have gone through it to say, this is what you're going to look for, and to say it's okay if you don't want to speak up the first year, and if you have something you need to say the first year, it's okay to say it.
Oh yeah, it's okay to say it, and it's just, people need to get comfortable with it. It's a somewhat intimidating situation when you start out, because you'll go in and you'll hear all these people with professional credentials coming out of their ears, speaking in acronyms and talking about this or that funding source and whatever, and you'll wonder if you should have brought a business dictionary with you, and the answer will probably be yes. But you just pay attention, take notes if you need to, ask questions, not necessarily during the meeting, but afterwards. And that's another reason why having a supportive board member or staff person is helpful, because it really helps to have someone you can just ask. Like, if, I don't understand what you meant when you said that the funding for this year was capitated per head.
Yeah.
That's a fancy way of saying that a certain amount of funding is allocated per person. Why they don't just say that is beyond me. But that's, people will say things like that, and you probably won't understand all of them. I don't understand some of them after being on the board for 2 years. It's amazing how many acronyms they come up with. But it's, you'll just learn as you go, basically.
And I always thought, for me, frankly, when I was on the board I was on, that mentoring for me personally would have been an important aspect for me, maybe to get me to speak up quicker, because I know there was a lot I wanted to say and I felt I missed out on a lot.
Yeah, well, that's how you learn, and that's hopefully if the new consumer on boards training will be better, better than the last ones for that. We can design it around things like that and have people better prepared going in. But you can't overdo that either, because you'll never know enough to be perfectly confident when you walk in there for the first real meeting. That's not just a practice run or anything.
And I think people basically have to, and I think advice I would give people, and I think you would agree with me, they have to learn as they go and go with their strengths and go with their gut.
Oh yeah, and one thing also that agencies could do to help be more supportive, which I was able to do at LDA, is that before people apply to be on a board, let them sit in on a meeting or two. I mean, you usually don't have non-board members or non-staff at a meeting, but they can make exceptions to that. And it's reasonable to let a prospective board member sit in on a meeting before they're a member, just so they know what's going on and they know what they'll be getting into.
Any final thoughts you would like to give our people out there watching about being on boards?
Yeah, I would like to say overall it's a great experience. You get to meet plenty of interesting people. You get to talk about a lot of relevant stuff. And like I said, you get to influence how whatever agency is serving you is run. I mean, you're actually able to help govern it, not just offer your advice. And that's a good thing. That's something self-advocates should do more of.
And I think I would just like to say, if you want to be on a board, for me personally, go to your agency and say, I would like to at least explore the option and think about it and talk about it and check it out, and let's sit down and talk and have the opportunity to at least try it. So let's sit down and talk and think about it and give people like Brian and myself an opportunity and just kind of think about it. And self-advocates like myself and Brian have a lot to offer, and maybe you do. So we've had a great conversation, and I'd like to thank Brian for being on the show today. And this has been the BJ Stachio and Brian Keavey for Self-Advocacy in Action. Thank you for watching today, and have a great self-advocacy day. Thank you very much. Hello, this is BJ Stachio for Self-Advocacy in Action, with a reminder on how you can get more information, how to be involved with the next board training. You can contact the Self-Advocacy Association at 674-6300 extension 3170 pound for more information. So please contact them for more information. And also, if you move, please remember to register to vote. Brian, would you like to say anything about the board's training before we leave?
Yeah, I've been through the board's training, or a previous version of it, and it is very helpful if you're interested in being on boards. It tells you a lot of basic things about how they work and what to expect, and hopefully the next version will be even better. So definitely make that call if you're interested. And if anybody from agencies are watching this, you should consider referring people to this training if they're interested in being on boards. And you definitely should consider having consumers on your board. It provides a helpful perspective, and it's something that will ultimately make your job easier.